Hey everyone, I am Danny Michael, Associate Curator of the Cody Firearms Museum here at the Buffalo Bill Center of the West. Today we have the Winchester 1873 to talk to you about, but remember to subscribe to the YouTube channel for more videos about our amazing collections here at the center. And the firearm today is, as I mentioned, an 1873 Winchester. And the question I have for this gun, is it really the so-called gun that won the West? Now, it's often noted as that in histories about the 1873. A lot of collectors and writers have called it that. But what does that come from? And so the Winchester 1873 was introduced in the year 1873, and it was produced until 1923. And I have a second object to talk to you about, which will reference that in a minute. But this gun is a classic American lever action rifle. So the way the gun works is there are cartridges in this under the barrel tube here. That's a tubular magazine. And every time you move this lever and work this lever, it feeds a new round into the action and into the chamber and cocks the hammer on the gun. So every time you work that, it feeds another round in, ready to fire, the gun's recocked, and you can shoot until you've used the entire magazine supply of cartridges. And generally, it depends on the barrel length and magazine tube length, but generally, Winchester 1873, chambered in 44-40, as this one is, could hold 14 or 15 or sometimes a little bit more, or sometimes a few more cartridges. So in the day and age that this gun existed, that's actually quite a lot of firepower. You know, just a few years before this, soldiers had fought in the Civil War with single-shot muzzle-loading muskets. So this is a big step forward in terms of technology. This gun is one made by the company. We're not quite sure because the serial number on this one has been damaged. And there's two reasons that serial number might have gotten damaged. One of those reasons is that it was potentially part of a fire in a warehouse in Boston. And the other is that it was part of a shipwreck. And the reason we don't know which is because the serial number that we can read is 461. Now there's at least two more digits to that serial number. And if it's one more digit or two more digits affects its outcome. So if it's one more digit, we think it's an 8, and that would put it as part of that shipwreck. If it's two more digits, it would be 4618 something, and that would make it part of that fire that's recorded in the Winchester record books as happening in Boston. Either way, both outcomes for those guns note that they came back to the factory and were refinished. So this gun came to us from the Winchester collection. It went back to the factory after either its shipwreck or fire, was refinished, and then stayed with the company collection. So this is very much as new as it was made in the 1880s, which is pretty remarkable. There's not a lot of original condition, high condition guns left like this. So it's got really intact bluing. It's got really intact color case hardening on the hammer and lever here. The gun is finally finished throughout. There are some handling marks on the stock, so that's a little bit dinged up. It's not 100% perfect. So this gun's a really great example of what a Winchester 1873 would have looked like back in the day. Now Winchester, as I said, they introduced this gun in 1873 and it immediately became a really big seller for them. Previously, they had only had the Winchester model 1866 to sell. The changes they made to this gun were that 1866 had a brass receiver. It was chambered in a 44 rimfire cartridge. This gun has a steel receiver and is chambered for 44-40, what would become known as 44 Winchester, which became a very, very common cartridge used in the American West. And over the lifespan of this gun, Winchester would sell over 700,000 rifles, 700,000 model 1873s. They also sold additional other models, but this was their best seller until the 1894 was introduced. And like I said, the production lifespan of this gun originally was just over 50 years, which is really remarkable. And when we think about really common firearms in the West, you'll often hear the Colt single action Army as one of those contenders. Winchester produced more than twice as many 1873s as Colt did of their famous single action Army revolver. So that's pretty remarkable as well. And of course, I got to get back to that original question. Is this the gun that won the West? Winchester certainly believes so, and they would go on in the early 20th century to launch a marketing campaign based on that idea, this idea that this gun was so prevalent in the West, so common, that their firearm had some claim to being a significant impact on the American West. But that's a little bit of a misnomer because there's lots of different guns in the American West. And really, this gun would have predominantly been in the hands of perhaps white settlers. It was not widely used by, or I should say, it's not used at all by the US Army. We don't have any good evidence that that really happened. It's sold internationally. The shipwreck outcome for this one that I mentioned, that was actually on its way to Chile, that ship. And Winchester sold a lot of these in South America. They sold them in Europe. They sold them on the East Coast. So not every one of those 700,000 even went to the American West. So it's really a mixed bag of if this gun could claim that. In reality, probably the most likely contender would be perhaps a Springfield trapdoor in the hands of US soldiers. But the other flip side of this is the Winchester 1873 did do another thing in the American West, and that is that it defended the West. So a lot of these actually ended up in the hands of Native Americans when they could purchase them and ammunition. So this is a firearm you can find in period photographs of Native Americans. We can find documentary evidence about troops on the frontier writing that Winchester repeaters are in the hands of those peoples that they're fighting against. So in some ways, this gun is so ubiquitous in the American West that it's really not that great to say it won the West. It did a lot of things in the West. It defended, it settled, it hunted, all sorts of things were uses for this firearm in the American West. And the other piece I had to talk to you about today was this one. So I mentioned that the Winchester 1873 was produced until the 1920s, which is a really remarkable production lifespan for this design, especially because a lot better firearms had come out in those intervening years. But this one is a really special piece from the collection, and it is Winchester 1873 receiver, serial number 709586. So Winchester produced just over 720,000 examples, as I said. This is from near the end of the gun's lifespan. So this receiver was made in 1916, and probably they made a batch of receivers and then assembled them for a few more years after that as orders trickled in. And we think this gun or this receiver has never been assembled into a functioning firearm. So this was something that Winchester pulled out of the production line to save and as an example of something that they made. And so this one came to us also from the Winchester collection, and as far as we can tell, was never made into a gun. It was just sort of that sort of memento piece almost from the end of the production lifespan of the very famous Winchester 1873. I mentioned one of the reasons we sort of talk about this gun as the gun that won the West is because of Winchester's marketing campaign. That was one reason, but of course this gun became very popular for the Western movie genre. So when you watch a Western movie from the middle of the 20th century, a lot of times you'll see these Winchesters, that Colt single action, as the firearms that those characters are carrying. And there's very good reasons for that. It was easy to get blanks for these. They were easy to work with. They looked the part and all that stuff, but it helped cement that popular image that really went back to Winchester's marketing campaign as a firearm of the American West. And of course, that went even back further to a figure, Buffalo Bill himself used a lot of Winchester firearms. He used one he specifically used several actually, Winchester 1873s in his performances. So that was the very early of that sort of pop culture mentality of what guns were in the American West. And other less common guns sort of got pushed out to obscurity. So I hope you found that video informative and enjoyed watching, and check back in next time.